welcome to Barry Interesting. I'm Barry Aycock, and I'm glad you've joined us today. My main objective with this program is to cover topics that I find interesting myself, but more importantly, topics that will interest you as well. For the first several episodes, we've hosted candidates who are currently competing for your vote in local elections. For this episode, Brent Stidham joins us to discuss his campaign for the office of Stoddard County Coroner. Brent is a lifelong resident of Stoddard County and has served the community as a sheriff's deputy for the past 6 years. Brent, welcome to Barry Interesting.
Hi, thanks Barry, appreciate you having me.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to get into some topics today, some issues that are important to the voters of Stoddard County. And you know, there's a lot of things that the people don't know that the coroner does. We're going to get into some of those topics also. But first, Brent's going to tell us a little bit about himself, his family, where he lives. Then we're going to get into the issues that are important to the voters of Stoddard County to elect their new coroner. So Brent, tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, my name's of course Brent Stidham. Grew up in Dexter. My wife, Lauren Blair Stidham, she's from Essex, and we currently reside in Dexter. A little bit about my family. My real mother, who's deceased, she was a Murphy from Bernie. My grandparents owned the Otasco store there in Bernie for about 21 years. And my dad, he's currently the city administrator in Dexter. He's been in Dexter since about 1991, I believe. He lived in Dexter before, went to Arkansas and worked for a little while. But Bernie, Dexter, my whole family's from. We've been around for forever. I've got family spread out a little bit all over the country, but my family and my wife's family were both pretty rooted there in Stoddard County.
I've met your dad a few times. He does a great job for the citizens of Dexter. So,
well, I'm sure he appreciates it.
A little shout out to your dad. He does a great job there.
Thank you.
So this is not really the glamour job for the county or an elected office, the coroner. It's not the one that gets all the headlines. It's one of those jobs that doesn't get a lot of publicity. Thank goodness, right?
Right.
What are the qualifications for a coroner?
Well, in the state of Missouri, the qualifications, the requirements by the state are actually not that high. The requirements are to be over 21 years old, be a resident of the county you're wanting to be elected in for at least 6 months, be a Missouri citizen for a year, and be a United States citizen. So what's put on by the state as your requirements to run for the office is not necessarily that high, but once you take the oath of office to win, or if you win, you take the oath of office, you have to uphold the roles of a coroner. The roles of a coroner is where things get a little more demanding. Your requirements to run for the office are not as high, but once elected, you have a lot more requirements, a lot more responsibility than just being 21 years old and from the county that you're representing.
That's a good point. What are the state requirements? Is there a lot of training that the state requires? Talking to my good friend James Powell, the coroner in Dunklin County, it seems there's not that much training, but he's telling me it may get a little more stringent in the next few years.
Right, so the role of a coroner, of course, is to investigate unattended, unusual, suspicious deaths. And I believe right now that the pay of a coroner is based a little bit on whether you attend some trainings. I think $1,000 of it is held out if you don't attend the required training in Jefferson City. But I think about 9 days ago, Governor Parson actually signed a bill that changes that a little bit. I think they're going to up the education that's required of a coroner once elected. And I read over that, but I'm not 100% sure what all's in that bill. But I think that your friend James would be right. I think there are going to be some changes to that coming up in the next few years.
Sounds like it's well needed, though. It's pretty unregulated. Once you go through the training once, it seems like the state doesn't give that much support right now. The bar's pretty low to fit the qualifications for a coroner.
Right, and so many of these counties are small and very rural, and so a coroner, they typically, a lot of times, a coroner is always in a lot of these small counties associated with a funeral home. So
Yes.
they already kind of know the paperwork side of things. They already know about death certificates. They already know about what all is needed as far as to submit to the state. So being someone who's not affiliated with a funeral home and getting elected coroner, it would be beneficial to have some state resources that could kind of train you and get you up to speed on what the state expects from the office.
Well, Brent, you're interviewing for the job. You're in front of the voters of Stoddard County right now. What makes you the best candidate for the job?
Well, I think what makes me the best candidate for the job goes back to the state statute for a coroner, is to be an investigator. A coroner, especially in rural America, is the voice of the dead. And as tough as that may sound, once someone is deceased, they don't have a voice. Of course, yes, they have family members, they have a guardian or whoever, but that's still not their voice in the legal aspect of things. That coroner is their voice. So, being an investigator for the last 7 years, working as a police officer, no, not every call that I've went on is a death, but I have been on several. And I think it's very important to seek out answers if a family has questions, if a friend has questions, if the police have questions. That's where the coroner's office steps in and starts to play more of an investigative role. And I feel like with my experience as an investigator, that's kind of led me into having a drive to run for this office.
How many deaths annually do we have in Stoddard County? I forgot what James Powell told me, but it was a lot more than I thought it was. So do you have any idea how many deaths? Is that a sunshine law deal? We can't really discuss that, or is that public knowledge?
I don't know 100% the exact number, and I would not want to give a number that was wrong. I do know that many of the deaths that occur in Stoddard County are under the care of a physician, whether it's in a nursing home or a hospital or hospice care. So those are treated a little different. There's paperwork involved, there's reporting that's involved, but going to a scene and actually doing investigating is not involved. Where the coroner steps in with that is overdose deaths, self-inflicted deaths, car accidents, and homicides even. But as far as an exact number of deaths, I don't have that exact number in front of me, so I wouldn't want to give the wrong.
Who's the current coroner in Stoddard County?
Kenny Pope.
Do you communicate with him some?
I do. I've known him for a while. I talked with him briefly when I decided to run for office, and he has expressed to me that regardless of who wins, he's very interested in working with the incoming coroner and making sure that there's a smooth transition.
That's a good point. Talking to my good friend James Powell, Dunklin County Coroner, he told me it was a 24-hour-a-day job. You may get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning for someone who passed away in a car accident, 4 o'clock in the morning someone committed suicide, noon when you're about to eat lunch, somebody overdosed.
Right.
So it's a 24-hour-a-day job. Do you have the stamina to do that?
I believe I do, yes. And I think that, again, going back to being a police officer, being on call, those kind of things, that helps with that. I think that it would be difficult going from, possibly a position that wasn't involved in this kind of line of work at all into a coroner's office would be difficult. But I've kind of gotten used to the being on call, the getting phone calls. You have to expect things, and there's no normal day. You never know what could happen. Hopefully nothing happens. Hopefully it's a quiet day and your phone doesn't even go off. But I do have the understanding that it's 24 hours a day. You always have to be available.
You just messed my next question up. I was going to tell you to give me a typical day for a county coroner in a rural area. The typical day is you're on call 24 hours a day, and you may get called 6 times a day, or you might not get called for a week, right?
Right, yeah, and I think that the daily life of a coroner is not, in rural America, is not what you see on TV. You're not a medical examiner. You're not just in a lab or in a morgue somewhere up in a big city. In a coroner's office, it's usually, maybe paperwork, phone calls, and you answer the call as they come in. So you can't really plan out what's going to happen Wednesday because you don't know. You can't plan out what's going to happen tomorrow because we don't know what's going to happen. So I think that the CSIs and the TV shows of the world have kind of glamored the position up to make it seem like it's something that it's not. And I think that it probably is more closely related to that in the big cities, but in rural America, it's definitely a very different type of thing.
I was talking to James Powell, though, like I said, the Dunklin County Coroner, and when he come into the job, it was a lot different than he expected. He didn't realize some of the things that was involved in the job, so he wanted me to tell you and your opponent, it's not like you think it is when you come in. He does depositions on criminal cases. He does a lot of paperwork. There's all kinds of things he's drug into court for, so you think you're prepared for that?
Yes, sir. I've testified on the stand before, of course, in criminal trials, and I think that the criminal aspect of it is something that you have to think about, whether it's a homicide or whether it's an overdose death that's going to be investigated as a homicide. You have to be ready to work with the police department, the sheriff's department, the prosecutor's office, because it's, at the end of the day, it's a part of the justice system. If you are working a scene that is suspicious or there's criminal involvement in that scene, you have to be ready to testify in court and to give depositions. And whenever you sign your name to that death certificate, you have to be ready to back that up, whether it's in court or whether it's with a family member.
Well, I can tell, Brent, you don't take that responsibility lightly. It could affect a whole family's lives. I know there's one example of a elderly lady who had Alzheimer's, and the family thought that she left some money to the wrong person. The family didn't get it, so your decisions can affect family members for the rest of their lives. So I know you don't take that responsibility lightly, because you'll be the judge on some cases.
Yes, sir. That's correct. You're right about that.
But let's get into something else, though. CSI, you mentioned CSI. You know, it is glamorous to a certain extent because of TV shows. It's not like the TV shows, but, you know, attorneys will call you for depositions. You're going to be on the stand testifying on behalf of either the family who had a loved one that died or the opposing team. So what experience in your past, in your police experience, thinks helps you in that respect?
I think just knowing how the justice system works, knowing how the process works, knowing how things go from the time that you get the call until the time that the case is finished. You know, sometimes a criminal case can take years, and it's kind of the same with deaths. I think you know, if you get involved in a homicide, which luckily we don't have a lot of in Stoddard County, but we do have them everywhere does. And if you get involved in a homicide as the coroner that's responding to the call, you know, that could be something that takes up a lot of time over the course of several years.
Yes.
It's not just going to the scene that night and then performing an autopsy and then being done. It's something that can last a while. So knowing that process and already knowing that from a law enforcement side of things, I think is a benefit.
You mentioned earlier that you know, the coroner works with funeral homes a lot. Do you have a relationship with funeral homes, and how many funeral homes is there in Stoddard County?
I believe there are 8 funeral homes in Stoddard County. And I have actually spoke to all of them since the time that I filed. I have talked to the owners of each of them, some in person, some I haven't been able to catch, but I've talked through them through the phone or text message. And I know all of the owners of the funeral homes in Stoddard County, and all of them have expressed a willingness to work with whoever is in the role of coroner. They're all good people. they all run good businesses, and they all will be ready to help the coroner's office in any way that they can.
And a lot of these people are very experienced with the past coroners. A lot of the funeral home businesses are very old. They've been in Stoddard County for a long time, so
Right.
I'm sure they've got a lot of good advice for whoever becomes the coroner, because they know the job probably as good as you do.
Absolutely, absolutely. You can learn a lot from people if you just ask. You know, you don't want to go in and have questions and try to do everything yourself if there's somebody that can answer some of these questions that's local. So I think that's a benefit to Stoddard County, is having these people that own the funeral homes.
You're going to be working with law enforcement a lot, and James told me that you show up to a crime scene, there's sometimes a power struggle on, does the coroner take over? Does the sheriff take over? Do you know your role when you show up at a crime scene, and do you know your role when you're supposed to take over and when you're not?
Right. So I think that I know all of the law enforcement in Stoddard County on a first name basis. So I think that having that relationship with every officer in the county will be helpful. I can see where, you know, sometimes the water is muddy in that topic, but at the end of the day, when it comes to a death, the coroner and law enforcement can discuss and maybe have some kind of disagreements on exactly what happened, but the law enforcement officer is not the person that's signing their name at the death certificate. So at the end of the day, the coroner is the person that's responsible for that. So I think that our law enforcement in Stoddard County works really well with our coroner's office, and I hope to continue that if I'm elected.
This is my very last question. I think it's important to directly talk to the voters of Stoddard County. When a family has a loved one that passes away of suicide, murder, car accident, whatever it is, you know, families grieve in different ways, and I think that, you know, sensitivity, that goes a long ways, compassion. When their loved one dies, you're going to be dealing with those families, and many different families grieve in many different ways. So that's going to be a big part of your job.
Right.
You know, when you pronounce someone dead, that's affecting someone's family, lost their mom, lost their dad, lost their grandma, brother. So that's a big responsibility for the coroner. Right. And it's a sad one in some ways. It's
yes,
depressing
it is.
in some ways. So you feel like you're up to the job to handle that.
And I do. I've been through a lot of personal deaths in my life, from a parent to a sibling, a childhood best friend, my grandparents. I've been through a lot of those situations, and some of them were not the best circumstances. My brother, he actually he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and so I know from those experiences what the family is going through. I feel like in that experience, the only way to know how someone is going to react is to have been through it yourself. And coming from that side of things, I know that these people are very emotional. I know that they are very, sometimes they can lash out at you. They can have a ton of questions. And so I think that being compassionate, knowing how to handle these families, knowing how to handle these issues and talk with these families about the steps that they need to take moving forward, I think that's important. And having been through some of this stuff, I saw it firsthand. I know what is expected out of the office of coroner.
It sounds like you're up to the challenge.
Well, I guess we'll find out. I hope so.
Well, Brent, thank you for being on episode 4 of Very Interesting. Brent's interviewing for the job as Stoddard County Coroner, and I'm going to let you have the last parting shot.
All right. Well, thank you, Barry, for having me. You've got an awesome place down here. To the voters of Stoddard County, I just asked for your support on August the 4th on the Republican primary. I think that I can do a great job for you all. I asked for the chance to show Stoddard County what I can do for you as your next Stoddard County Coroner. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.